I like to make deliverability boring, and you just build your list and you never have to build a list ever again. 99% of companies don't know what their outbound burn rate is. Nothing actually gets easier. It's just where the difficulty exists shifts to a different location.
Welcome everyone to the GTM Kinetyca podcast number 6. Today we have here Tony Chedrawee. He is the GTM Strategist at Apollo, and we are very much looking forward what he can tell us. So, hi Tony, how are you doing?
Hey David, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here and taking time. I'm actually right now in Italy. You cannot really see it in the background, but there's actually the ocean. It's really pretty. But like even in vacation, I have to work. But I mean, this is not work. I love to have these kind of talks. So yeah, happy to be here with you.
I wish I could join you over there. I'm in upstate New York right now, and it's been a little bit of a rainy day, but can't complain too
Really?
much.
I heard that the summers are actually extremely hot in New York.
They are usually hot and humid, so we get a little bit of both.
I see. Okay. So let's dive into the topic, GTM and Apollo. Apollo is obviously one of the big brands in the whole GTM space, right? Everybody knows Apollo. And so it's very interesting to hear what you can tell us here. So let's start actually with the basics. What do you do at Apollo?
Yeah, I do a couple different things. So half of my role is focused on supporting Apollo's agency partners. So this is a lot of work around enablement and helping them to build their Apollo practice. And then the other half of my role is helping Apollo's own outbound team and bringing different GTM perspectives and strategies into all of our outreach efforts.
Sounds great. Sounds interesting. Do you have some secret sauce there? Some special things that you're doing at Apollo that everybody would love to know?
I think that's what everybody's looking for, right? We're all looking for the silver bullet and the secret sauce to GTM success. We're all trying to figure it out. I think the space is moving so quickly, and anybody that claims that they have the secret is probably maybe a little bit misled. That being said, we do have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of thoughts that have been built out really over years and working with thousands of customers. And we think we have a pretty good understanding of where GTM is going. And we're trying to account for that within our product, within all of our enablement efforts, within our own go-to-market strategies. And ultimately, we wanted to codify that vision of where our space is heading into a single methodology and sort of make a claim as bold as it sounds and to say, hey, this is where we think the space is going and this is what we're going to be building towards. And yeah, that's been a lot of what I've been focusing on too.
Great. Okay, so how does this methodology then look like?
Yeah, great question. A very natural question too. So let's get into it, David. So there are a few different parts to the methodology. I find that it's helpful to contrast it with traditional outbound, right? So if you'll bear with me and I'll kind of walk you through what I'm sure you're very familiar with, but the traditional outbound model is, you have your team of SDRs, you have leadership set some sort of strategy or direction, and then that team goes out and tries to go fishing in the market, right? They're all casting nets in there, they're casting their lines, they're trying different approaches for targeting, they're trying different approaches for messaging, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very sort of scattered process. And what we've seen over the last couple of years, especially with the growing popularity of data orchestration and AI in outbound, and everybody has their Claude with MCP and all that, is that model fundamentally hasn't actually changed. It just looks a little bit more sophisticated. But you still have leadership setting a strategy and that being interpreted by layers of what used to be SDRs and now is SDRs and go-to-market engineers. So that's sort of one perspective of looking at it. It's a problem that we call strategy dilution. And so we wanted to solve for that by creating a system that has leadership set the strategy and it's all sort of centralized. And we are kind of shortening that gap between the vision and the actual execution of outbound. And of course, there's a lot of AI in there. There's a lot of technology use, and there's still room for go-to-market engineering, but it's now supporting the strategy rather than being individual interpretations of it.
Sounds great. Okay, so you're helping in making sure that there isn't so much dilution from the leadership to the actually SDRs that are actually doing the work, right? So what does it look like in practice?
The first step towards implementing this idea of consolidated GTM is to consolidate list building, right? So that's the fundamental first thing that SDRs do or go-to-market engineers do. Now, a lot of people think with list building, especially with AI, they think about how AI can be used to speed up the process, right? But that's kind of taking a new technology and applying it to an old model, when AI should cause us to question the model in the first place. Like, does list building even need to be an activity that is done sort of on a regular basis? Or can you just build your list and it's just one list and you never have to build a list ever again, right? Now, this wasn't really possible before AI because, you could go into the filters and you can account for firmographics and like kind of easy quantitative filters, but you still had that layer of the qualitative, right? Or information that's not really available in the databases. And you needed humans to kind of parse through that and determine who's in market and who's not in market. But because of AI, like, you could do that on your entire market, like, instantly, right? So take this example, right? Say my target market has about, let's say, 50,000 companies in it, right? How do I get to that 50,000, right? So I might go to the database and cast a wide net with filters and get 200,000, right? So I know that everybody in my market is in that list, but there's also a bunch of other junk in that, right? So I call that the suspected market. Like, we know our list is in there with a bunch of trash that we need to get rid of. So that's what you apply the AI on, right? And you eliminate the 75% that are not relevant. Now, you might say, well, that's a lot of token spend, right? Maybe, but you only do it once. Maybe you do it every other year if the nature of your market has people going in and out of it, right? But this is a binary qualification. We're not determining how good of a fit they are. We're determining fundamentally, is there a fit, right? And so you do this activity just once, and you go from, let's say, 200,000 down to 50,000. Now that's your list. So you have this list that you build only once every 2-3 years. Maybe you only ever just build it one time. And then from there is when you get into the scoring, prioritization, messaging, and all of that, right? But if that list is built, and if you can, in theory, score that entire list comprehensively, and you're just surfacing the best of the best to the very top, and every day you're just grabbing from the top of that list, right? So list building doesn't become this discrete activity where you go and you come up with an idea to build a list. It's now all centralized, and all of those ideas for campaigns and different outreach angles are now embedded within the logic that scores the list and surfaces different companies or contacts to the top.
Yeah, I find this idea super compelling because, it's true, like in Outbound, very often the way how it's approached is like you all the time set up, okay, now let's make a campaign for this conference. Now let's make a campaign for social media. Now let's make a campaign for, I don't know, people that changed jobs recently in this sector. And the problem there is that you just all the time in this loop again and again and again go through. And the way how you're proposing is that we do this differently. We actually really have a comprehensive idea of the whole total addressable market that we have, and we just all the time look at it like from an overview perspective, but sometimes like with an eagle eye on specific segments and see what is exactly happening. I think one thing that is just important here, that somebody has a really good understanding what is actually their ICP, and they have to have clear product market fit, right? Because if a company is still figuring out, well, is it actually the ones over 100 million ARR, or are the ones maybe over 5 million ARR interesting for us, right? Then I think it becomes a bit difficult, right?
Yeah, of course. Everything's easier when you have product market fit. What I would say, and I've encountered companies that have been sort of skeptical about Outbound, and they say like, well, we're still trying to figure out if we have product market fit and the best ways to engage with the market. And what I'd say to that is this is one of the fastest ways to do that, right? You get this giant list, and we're not talking about spray and pray, right? We're not talking about just reach out to everybody and then you'll do your learning. But it allows you to codify your assumptions or your hypotheses about your market, right? So let's say I have my list, 50,000 accounts, and I have this idea that healthcare industry is a really good industry to target, right? So under the old model, I create a standalone campaign for healthcare industry. I build a list around it. I build messaging around it. I create my multiple emails, my sequence, and then I find companies and then I send it off. But under this model, industry becomes one of the different signals or parameters that you use to score a company, right? And so you simply bump the score for the healthcare label, right? So you say, what is the industry of this company? If it's healthcare, they get, let's say, 50 points, and the other ones get maybe 25 points, right? So naturally, you're accounting for that assumption without throwing out all of the other signals, which is what you do under the campaign model, right? Under this model, you can still give a boost to those healthcare companies while still being able to score based on any other factor that you have.
Makes sense. And how do you go further then after that? When you set up the whole total addressable market for this company, you told me there are like several steps in this process, right? So where do we go from there?
So the first thing you do is you set up your TAM. The second piece is deliverability. And the way I like to think about deliverability is I like to not think about deliverability, right? Nobody likes to think about deliverability. So how can we make it as simple as possible? And what I've found is a lot of people, when it comes to deliverability, a lot of leaders kind of choose arbitrarily what their infrastructure looks like, right? They say like, oh, well, we have 5 SDRs and maybe we'll give them each 5 mailboxes. Now that determines their capacity, but it's not based on anything. It's not database, right? It's not based on anything concrete within the market. So that capacity, if they fully use it, might only target, let's say, 1% of their entire TAM every year. They're leaving a lot of money on the table. Or the opposite, they target way too many people and then they burn through their market in, let's say, 1 or 2 months, right? So every company has an implicit burn rate. They don't necessarily all know what it is. I'd say 99% of companies don't know what their outbound burn rate is. How many months does it take to reach out to your whole market? But they have a burn rate nonetheless, right? And so because you have your entire TAM in one place, you have, let's say, 50,000 accounts, and say on average you have 2 contacts per account, you have 100,000 contacts, you can now decide like, okay, how long do I want it to take to reach out to that entire market? And then after that, I reach out again. And after that, I reach out again. And I'll typically advise anywhere from, let's say, if you want to be really aggressive, 4 months. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, maybe 12 months, but at least it's then an intentional decision. And then you know exactly how many mailboxes, domains, etc. How many do I need to set up? And then you can use a tool like Apollo's mailbox infrastructure to just order your mailboxes or whatever platform you're on. And then it's done. You don't have to think about it. It's just let it run itself. So that's the second component of the methodology.
So when you say deliverability, you mean actually like the way of setting up the campaigns or the infrastructure or the organization of my outreach, basically, right? You don't mean like technical deliverability and like, are these emails actually like landing in the inbox?
Yeah, kind of both, but more in reference to the capacity and the infrastructure. So how many mailboxes and how many domains do you have or do you need? Most of the time that's a blind decision. Whereas within this methodology, it's based on the size of your market.
Makes sense. Let's actually talk also about the other deliverability part. I mean, there are different camps, right? There's one camp of people that are super analytical with this and have 12 different tools that figure out, okay, what is the bounce range? You should not obviously track, right? But all the different things and rotate the emails in very sophisticated structures. And then the other ones that just say, burn it, refill, right? So they just burn through the domains and then buy new domains and they just go all the time and is set up. What camp are you in?
And yeah, there's a spectrum there. I'll give you my personal preference, not necessarily recommending this or anything like that, but I'd say I'm more on the line of burning the domains, right? So I say that very carefully, right? Like you don't want to get into the trap of not paying attention to anything, and as soon as a domain or mailbox underperforms, you burn it and get to a new one, because then you're on like mailbox or domain number 500 and your URLs look really weird and unprofessional, and and that becomes a chore within itself. If you're doing that, and that's what you have to resort to, your outreach might not be that good, right? You might need to look at your copy and your content and really refine it, or even your targeting to make sure you're doing quality outreach, because you don't want to spam people, right? Now, that being said, there's a trade-off with the amount of time that you spend trying to heal one mailbox and trying to tune every single thing rather than just having some buffer mailboxes in place, right? So what I typically advise is I say, first off, you determine your market size, you determine your burn rate, right? And then there's a formula for that. Like, say, the number of contacts divided by the burn rate, divided by the number of sending days per month, and then how many emails on average you want to send, right? So you get to the number of how many emails do I need to send every month, and then you derive your mailboxes and domains from that. What I typically then suggest is add 20% for buffer, right? And those 20% are just kind of sitting on the sidelines. They're waiting to be tagged in. As soon as one mailbox underperforms, you don't burn it, you don't get rid of it. You just rotate it into buffer, and then you take the one from buffer and you rotate it into live, right?
Do you have like a Claude setup or something?
You could do both. You can tag your mailboxes. You can set up automated mailbox placements depending on what tools you're using. And you can tag your mailboxes and then rotate them out. That gives you a little bit of breathing space when it comes to outreach. But then I also recommend, if a company can
Tony?
afford it, I like to make deliverability boring. Like, it's something that I think occupies people's minds a little bit too much. And if you can create a system that just manages itself with a little bit of oversight, of course, then you'll be in a really good place.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So that's why I typically recommend you set the 20% buffer. And then I also recommend for companies that can afford it to create a redundant system, a completely second independent set of mailboxes and domains, maybe even living on a different platform, because you never know. And if something happens, I've seen entire deliverability platforms just go down and get taken offline. And then you have a redundant backup. And then you don't have to restart and wait for everything to warm up and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a big topic, right? I mean, it's the whole technical infrastructure. I can tell you a little bit about how we're doing it at Kinetyca, and then we can go to the next topic.
Please.
We actually have a setup now where we do the normal stuff like the additional domains and different SMTPs. So our Outlook, Google SMTP server, right? Like the whole different setups. Then we rotate the emails which are burning out. And then we have a structure like how we refill them and buy new ones, right? So we have to really make a cadence out of this. And I mean, you see that the cost for this is becoming more and more for everyone, right? I just saw a post the other day, I think it was by Ty Frankel or something, where he mentioned that all the agencies right now are raising their prices because the infrastructure is going more and more and more. Because like in the past, you needed this amount of email addresses, and now you need 3 or 4 times more, and you have to replenish them all the time, right? So
yeah, the cost is definitely going up. I'm curious, what do you do with those mailboxes that you say a mailbox starts hitting spam? Do you discard it and create a new one? Do you create a new domain, or do you hold on to it and let it warm up and heal on the side?
yeah, I mean, we just had today actually discussion about this topic because like in general, we warm them up, right? We put them back to the warm-up pool and then warm it up for some time and then put them again to the normal pool. But now we actually want to see, like, we'll observe better if they actually are hitting then again the inbox or not, right? With tests or by looking at the percentages, how much gets delivered. And then when they don't, then we just throw them out, right? But we try to have a system that is much more like really runs like a machine all the time. It looks at all these parameters and then just replenishes by its own. So something that's much more proactive than reactive, right?
Yeah, that's great. Do you do any like automated inbox placement tests, anything like that?
We have partners that we work with that do this. Yeah, and other than that, the normal things that where we also do it ourselves manually. But this is a topic all the time, right? We are thinking all the time, like, okay, how can we adapt and change it and all this? So good. Then let's go further. So we talked about the different parts and the process, right? We were at deliverability. What is there more to tell?
Yeah, so the first big pillar was the TAM pillar, right? Second one was deliverability. The third and fourth are scoring and then messaging. Now, the cool thing with scoring and messaging is we do them together, right? A lot of times the signals that you use to score and prioritize are also the ones that you use to tailor your messaging on. And so what we are advising customers to do is to set up what we call a signals table, right? I'll avoid walking through like an actual spreadsheet of one of these, but you can kind of think about it as a planning document where you list out all of your signals. And the way I like to define a signal is a question that you ask about a target account or a target contact. And then it has possible answers, right? And those answers come with a scoring implication and they come with possibly messaging implications, or maybe both, right? So you have scoring signals, you have messaging signals, and then you have the hybrid ones. So you organize this all within your table. And this is what consumes that campaign logic that we were talking about before, right? When I mentioned that a healthcare targeting campaign is sort of old school, what replaces that is the industry signal and the score and the messaging guidelines for healthcare. And then that's where all of the enrichments come from too, right? You can almost think about it as like an inverted enrichment table where each signal is a row. And then once you actually apply it within your system, then it becomes a column. So you'd have a column for industry, headcount growth, news and updates, or whatever signals that you're looking at. So yeah, we consolidate the scoring and the messaging into a signals table, and then that informs what gets built on the GTME front in order to actually answer those questions.
And where do you actually organize everything here? I mean, would you do this in a specific CRM? Would you do this in Clay? Well, I guess you do it in Apollo, right? I mean, since you work in Apollo. But yeah, what are the different places you would suggest here?
Yeah, you might think that I'd say the only place to do it is Apollo, or the best place to do it is Apollo. And of course, you can do all of this in Apollo. And it's a great tool for any company that really wants to have all of their methodology in one place. But part of Apollo's product strategy, it includes headless tools, right? So through the MCP, through API, you can really do this anywhere. And so if you have a very sophisticated system, we've worked with companies that their outbound stack is Snowflake and N8N, right? And so they have agents in N8N that are doing all these different things. And so where everything gets executed really depends on what technology you're using, what technology you're comfortable using, and then who's managing it. So yeah, it's kind of flexible, but that's by design.
Interesting. Well, so these days everybody's talking about Claude, right? So everybody's like building their own Claude system in their companies, their own harnesses. How does it look like for you? Do you have already a bunch of software developers sitting there together and like building all these Claude skills, harnesses, setups?
So yes and no, right? So we as Apollo, a lot of our internal tools, but also we need to eat our own dog food, as they say, even with our headless tool set. So we're playing around with everything, right? There are companies out there that are, they have their GTMEs are starting to look less like SDRs and more like software developers, right? With a little bit of GTM expertise and a little bit of market knowledge. And so it's really cool seeing what people are coming up with. You always think that, man, like I've seen it all, right? And then somebody has some flow that extracts data from some system and merges it with data from another system and then creates some sort of really cool asset. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff being done with Claude. I will say one mistake I think a lot of people make is they get access to these MCP tools, even Apollo's MCP tools, and their entire strategy is, I'm just going to tell Claude to do my outreach, right? But you mentioned the word harness earlier, right? So like what are harnesses for? It's to impose structure and order and a specific methodology over the system. And so people can build their own harnesses, but we advise them to take a structured model and to deploy it that way. And again, that looks different depending on the stack that they're using. But this is why we have the methodology, right? Because if you take that methodology, regardless of what your build surface is, you can impose that structure and order and at least have a systematic approach rather than just telling Claude, go find me leads.
Yeah, I think this is an important part as well, because on one side you could think, well, GTM is becoming much easier because, well, you just need Claude actually right now and just a few API connections, and you can just run everything on your own. You don't need anyone else anymore. Claude just tells you everything. But at the end of the day, you still have to beat the market in a way, at least. I mean, and when I say beat the market, I mean you have to be interesting. Like when you land in the inbox of someone, it has to stick in a way. And this is not just for outbound. I mean, this is the same like when you do social media, when you do ads, whatever it is, right? And there's always the creative part, and there's the knowledge, the business strategy, and all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that I think always will stay, because AI. Because I mean, think about it, if it wouldn't be the case, if there wouldn't be the case, then everybody will get a ton of leads and a ton of revenue, which doesn't work because of the capitalistic system in itself, right? It's like
Yeah.
there are some companies that win, the others not. So therefore, this is actually, I think, really a limitation of AI in a way. I mean, I'm getting a little bit philosophical
Totally.
here. I don't know, like, what's your thought on this?
I mean, as pessimistic as it can sound, I'm a believer that nothing actually gets easier. It's just where the difficulty exists shifts to a different location. Right? Because if it's easier for you, it's also easier for your competitors. Right?
Yeah.
And so the bar is constantly getting raised, and the need for innovation, the need for creativity, the need for genuine value never actually goes away. It's just that how you're able to do those things changes, right? So yeah, tools are becoming more available, and it's easy for people to now do simple things. And those simple things could have worked a few years ago, right? Like if you were the only one with Claude Code 10 years ago, right? I thought about this the other day. I was like, what would have happened if 10 years ago I was the only one with Claude Code? It's like, I could take over the world.
Magician.
You know, but like now everybody has it. Everybody has really cool websites with really good design, with really cool automations and really cool this and that, right? And what I find interesting about that is now the barriers are not so much mechanical, right? Technological. Now it really is about value, right? It's like, do you really have a good product? Do you really have something the market wants? Can you guide the AI? Can you instruct it? Can you orchestrate it? Can you identify the right methodology and put it in the right place? You said you don't want to get too philosophical, but you kind of have to, right? Like that's where things are going. That's why a lot of, I read this on the news recently that a lot of AI companies, not their next big hiring push is philosophy majors. Like who would have thought?
Yeah, like creativity, thinking out of the box, innovation. Like I mean, it's more and more important than ever. Yeah.
And I think there's this thought experiment I like to do sometimes where I imagine a world with a perfect market, right? So like imagine a world where the second you have a need, you are instantly connected to the most ideal optimized provider of a solution, right? There's just no gaps. There's no friction. You don't have to search for them. They don't have to search for you. You don't have to compare anything else. It's just an instant match, right? Now that's an ideal that is impossible to achieve, right? I mean, there's always going to be some friction points, but that gap is over time is going to decrease, and where that friction is going to change. And this is why I was chatting with some agency owners saying that the agency model is always going to exist, because no matter what, there will be friction points, and because of competition, people will experience usually the same friction points or similar friction points, and you're always going to have a need for humans to help bridge that gap. And so AI is never going to, in my opinion, get us to that point of perfect optimization. And so there's always going to be gaps where we have to go in and fill that role.
Yeah. Interesting. So this brings me actually to the last question, since we have become so philosophical right now. What do you think is the next frontier when it comes to GTM engineering?
I think the next frontier is a human frontier. I think a lot of times when we think about technology and GTM, we're quick to go to those AI agents and perfect optimization and all of that. But I think one of the things that gets unlocked for us is being able to put humans in their most ideal roles and positions, right? So imagine you do have your TAM is centralized. You do have a signals table, and it's scoring everything, and it's constantly bringing the best of the best to the top, and you're doing evergreen outreach. Well, now that frees up your people to be market experts, right? To be experts on your product, experts on the needs, and they can then insert themselves into different parts of that process and create human in the loop systems where they add value, they add judgment, and they improve the system moving forward. So I think this is a big opportunity area for a ton of companies that are investing a lot in the technology and the systems, but are trying to figure out where they can put their people. And it's a really good way to improve the quality of your outreach and also improve the system itself over time.
This is a perfect point here to finish this podcast. Tony, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for showing us your system, your methodologies, and the way how we think about GTM engineering. And yeah, wish you all the best.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Dave.
For everyone out there, thank you very much for listening. If you're interested to learn more about GTM, feel free to visit Kinetyca.com and learn about the way how we are revolutionizing GTM and how GTM is done these days. Thanks and all the best. See you next time.